Module 5, Conducting a Research Study. In this module, we'll discuss the steps to conducting a research study. In the previous modules, we discussed what research is, how to create inclusive autism research, and how to develop a research study. In this module, we'll talk about the process of conducting a research study. There are 4 basic steps to conducting this study. We'll discuss each of these steps in this module. First, you create your detailed plans for the study and get ethical approval to make sure your study is safe and fair for participants. Second, you put your study design into place and collect data. Third, you analyze and interpret the data. Finally, you share your results. Research is a very complex process. We will briefly describe what it means to conduct a research study, but we'll also give more resources at the end of the module for you to learn more. Researchers must make detailed plans about how they'll conduct the study and get approval to make sure the study is ethical. Specifically, we'll discuss designing the study and getting approval from an ethics committee, finding people who might be interested in the study and giving them information about the study to help them choose if they want to participate, making sure that research participants are treated fairly. A study protocol is a detailed plan that explains how a research study will be done. The first part of the study protocol is background information. This part explains what questions the researchers hope to answer and why they chose this research topic. The second part of the study protocol explains what will happen during the study. It describes how researchers plan to recruit participants. It also includes details about any activities that participants will do in the study, such as therapy. Finally, it explains how researchers will protect the privacy of their participants. The third part explains how data will be collected, analyzed, and shared. Importantly, the study protocol must be approved by an institutional review board. An institutional review board, or IRB, is a board that reviews and approves study protocols to make sure they follow ethical laws and regulations. They also monitor the study to make sure the protocol is followed. There are many laws and regulations in place about how to ethically conduct research, and the IRB makes sure that the research team follows these rules throughout the entire research process. You can find more resources about the laws researchers must follow in our additional resources. Researchers must work with an IRB to conduct a research study. This way, the IRB can make sure that researchers are treating their participants ethically and keeping their information safe. Research universities and hospitals usually have IRBs. Some community health organizations also have IRBs. The government has a database of all approved IRBs in the U.S. One of the most important decisions researchers make is deciding how they will recruit more people. Recruitment means inviting people to participate in a study. A good recruitment plan can help more people find and participate in a study. Having more participants will usually give better results. Researchers will also have better results if they can recruit a diverse group of participants. For example, if they want to study autistic adults, it is best to invite adults from many different age groups. If all of the participants are 20 years old, the results might not apply to older adults. It is also important for researchers to invite people who are often left out of the research process. As we reviewed in Module 1, many groups of people have been left out of autism research. This includes Black, Brown, and Indigenous people, autistic girls, women, and transgender and non-binary people, autistic people with intellectual disabilities and co-occurring medical conditions, and poor and working class families. Many families may be interested in participating in early autism therapy research studies, but there may be barriers that make it hard for them to join. Some examples of these barriers are difficulty getting to the research lab, inability to take time off work, and access to childcare. However, there are many possible solutions that can help overcome these barriers. Researchers should include information about these barriers and solutions in the study protocol. Researchers could hold some parts of the study virtually and loan technology to those who need it to participate. If their study needs people to come in person, they could give people travel vouchers. They can also allow participants to schedule during evenings or weekends so that families will not need to take time off work. Researchers can also provide childcare so that caregivers can participate in a study. Letting families know that the study is meant to be inclusive may help some families feel more comfortable joining. Researchers can also let families know that they welcome any questions or feedback. Some research studies have had strict exclusion criteria. This exclusion criteria says who is not allowed to join a study. Researchers usually have strict exclusion criteria because they want their study to have high internal validity. In other words, they are worried that including people from certain groups will lower the internal validity because certain participants will be treated differently than others, or certain participants have different needs and characteristics. But this makes research very exclusive for people in certain groups. For example, many autism research studies prevent children with intellectual disabilities or certain medical conditions from joining because they may have different characteristics. They may also not know how to accommodate these children's needs, but we won't know how to best support these children until we include them in research. Many studies will also exclude families who are not proficient in English from participating in research studies. But researchers should hire interpreters, translators, or bilingual research team members to make sure these families can participate in research studies. Many people may not trust researchers and research institutions. If someone has experienced discrimination from doctors or clinicians, they may feel less safe around researchers. Hearing about unethical research studies can also lead to a loss of trust. For example, some historical studies have tricked people of color into dangerous medical treatments. People also may not trust autism researchers because of the history of bias and exclusion of many people from autism research. Research teams should acknowledge these problems. They can let participants know what steps they have taken to build trust and reduce bias. Researchers can also work with different communities and local organizations in designing their study and recruitment plan. For example, researchers can engage with autistic people and caregivers from different backgrounds. This will help the study be relevant and meaningful for participants from different communities. Engaging with community members will help to identify unique barriers, make studies more accessible, and build trust between researchers and participants. Informed consent is the process when people learn about the research study and agree to participate. It is very important for researchers to give people all the information they need in order to consent or agree to participate in the study. Parents or legal guardians provide consent for children under the age of 18. People over 18 years old who have legal guardians may also need consent from their guardian to participate in a study. To get fully informed consent, researchers must provide information about the study's goals and procedures. For example, researchers can explain what activities or therapy might be involved in a study. Researchers need to tell people if there is a chance that they would be assigned to a control group that gets no therapy. They also need to tell people about the potential benefits and risks of participating in the study. The research team should also explain alternative options besides participating in the study, especially if the study is occurring in a real-world therapy setting. Researchers must also tell people about privacy considerations, like how their information will be collected, used, and protected. We'll talk more about privacy next. If any study procedures change, the research team must reobtain consent to make sure participants are comfortable with these changes. Finally, it is important that participants are told that they can withdraw consent or drop out at any time. And if they withdraw consent, they can ask that their data be deleted too. Researchers cannot take away compensation if individuals withdraw consent. Researchers can work with community members to improve the consent process. Many researchers may just provide people with a long document that is difficult to understand, but participating in a research study can be a big decision. It is important to make the information as easy to understand as possible. Community members can help make this information more understandable. For example, some people might find it easier to watch pre-recorded videos than to read a long consent form. Community members can also help to make sure that the procedures are as comfortable and safe as possible. This way, more people will want to participate and get as much benefit as possible. Assent is a term that refers to the willingness to participate in a study for someone who cannot provide informed consent, such as children. There are special rules for recruiting participants who cannot give informed consent. For example, young children cannot give informed consent, but we can use other methods to see whether the child wants to participate. For example, researchers can see whether a young child seems happy or frustrated when they are participating in the study. Researchers can also include children in conversations about the study. This is a new topic in early autism research. Working with community members can help us better understand ways to tell if children of different ages want to participate in a study. Study protocols include a lot of rules to help protect people's privacy. It is important for researchers to keep any personal information about their participants safe and private. They also cannot tell other people if a person participated in their study. Some studies give participants ID numbers to keep their information safe. This way, even if someone outside of the research team were to see the data, it would be saved under an ID number instead of a name or initial. This would make it harder for them to guess whose data it is. Another way to keep data safe is to save it on password-protected servers that only people on the research team can access. There is always a chance that privacy will accidentally be violated, but these plans make that much less likely to happen. In the case of autism therapy research, participants' information may also be protected by medical or educational privacy laws. Finally, researchers should include their plans for compensating participants in their study protocol. Compensation means rewarding someone for participating in a study. The amount or way that participants are compensated may depend on the setting of the study, the length of time, the possible risks and benefits of the therapy, and other factors. Compensation can come in the form of payment. Researchers can also offer the therapy in the study at no cost to participants. Some short-term studies with very little risk may even occur without payment, such as individuals completing an anonymous survey about their experience with a therapy so they can contribute to our understanding of that therapy. Offering a lot of money to join a risky study can be dangerous. Vulnerable people might want to join for the financial reward, even if the study hurts them. Community members can help make decisions about appropriate compensation. If you would like to take a break, this is a great place to do so. Once the study protocol is approved by the IRB, it's time to start the study and begin collecting data. We'll briefly review study design and talk about how data is monitored during the study. In this phase of the study, researchers put the study protocol into place. They will recruit participants and obtain informed consent, give participants the therapy or service of interest, and collect data. Data is often collected through surveys or standardized assessments. These procedures map onto the components of the PCORI framework used when developing the research question. Participants are recruited from the pre-specified population of interest using the plans from the study protocol. Researchers provide the primary and comparator interventions according to the setting and timing specified in the research question, and then they collect data about the outcomes they're interested in. This phase of the study can take a very long time, depending on the timing of your therapy and recruitment. For example, if researchers want to recruit 100 people for a 6-month-long therapy program, this phase of the study could last between 3 and 5 years, because not everyone will start at the same time. Researchers will also want to monitor their data throughout the study. This way, they can make sure they are getting all the information they need and check that the study is working as planned. There are 3 main topics we'll discuss with data quality in the next few slides: protocol deviations and adverse events, fidelity, and completeness. One type of event researchers should avoid is called a protocol deviation. Protocol deviations are unplanned changes that have been made from the original study protocol that was approved by the IRB. The study protocol will include detailed information about how to give therapy and assessments to participants. Researchers will describe the therapy, how it's given to participants, the materials used, the order of activities and assessments, and more. Researchers monitor the study activities to make sure they don't have any protocol deviations. If researchers do something differently than how they describe it in the study protocol, they must report it to the IRB. This helps to keep participants safe and make sure everyone has the same experience in the study. Researchers should usually avoid any unplanned changes. However, sometimes there are situations where it is not possible to avoid these changes. For example, canceling a therapy session because a participant needs to take care of their sick child is an unplanned change, but it is also the right choice to make. Another type of event researchers should avoid is called an adverse event. Adverse events are harmful, uncomfortable, or bad things that happen because of the study. For example, if a child gets scared and starts crying for a long time during an assessment, It is important to monitor this. Paying attention to these events can help researchers identify parts of the study that may be stressful for participants. Researchers must report adverse events to the IRB. Fidelity means making sure that everyone in the study gets the therapy as planned and in the same way. If the therapy isn't given to participants correctly, then we can't fairly assess if the therapy program is helpful. Researchers use checklists or ratings to make sure the therapy is given to participants correctly. For example, therapy sessions may be video recorded. Then, a member of the research team will watch the video and check off all of the therapy components that are used in the session. Or they can use a rating scale to rate how well the therapist used a therapy strategy. If anything is missing, the therapist may be told to make sure that they don't accidentally skip this in the future. For example, if one of the therapists isn't using the strategies very well, that could explain why children aren't learning new skills. So researchers monitor fidelity and support the therapist to ensure that fidelity is as high as possible in the future. Finally, researchers should check to make sure they aren't missing any data, also known as completeness. For example, if they ask participants to fill out surveys, it is important to make sure people aren't skipping questions on the survey. If they are interviewing people using video recordings, they can make sure that the full interview is recorded. Researchers can also check that the interview is transcribed correctly. If researchers notice that a lot of people are skipping surveys, they can come up with a plan to get this missing data. They could also ask the IRB for permission to change the surveys so they are easier for participants to complete. If you would like to take a break, this is a great place to do so. Once researchers have finished collecting all of their data, they can begin analyzing and interpreting the data. In this section, we'll talk about different topics related to data analysis and interpretation. We will also talk about how working with community members can help with interpreting data. Finally, we will explain terms like statistical significance and clinical significance. Once researchers are done collecting data, they have to prepare it to be analyzed. This usually starts with a process called coding. Coding means putting data into categories so it can be analyzed. In this process, researchers will decide what types of behaviors they are interested in. Then, they will observe the participants and count how often each type of behavior happens, or rate the behaviors on a scale. For example, researchers might count how often a child asks a question. Researchers will create manuals with very specific rules about how to count or rate behaviors. By being really specific and training people to use the manual, they can make sure everyone's data is coded in the same way and reduce bias in how the data is categorized. We'll describe a couple brief examples in the next 2 slides. For example, if a researcher wants to see if a language therapy helps children learn more vocabulary words, they might record a video of the child playing with their parent. Then, they can write down every time the child communicates and add up the total number of words at the end of the video. They can even code other things about that word, like if they use the word to request or comment on what was happening. Researchers can also use ratings instead of counting the frequency of behaviors. For example, if they want to see how well a therapy helped a child's emotional regulation while changing between activities, they can video record the child during a transition and rate their emotional regulation on a scale. They will create specific definitions for each point on the scale to make it easier for coders to rate. In this example, the researchers will describe what a 1, 2, and 3 mean on their scale. A coder will watch the video and put a check mark under the number that best describes the child's emotions while changing from being at home to being on the school bus. Once all the data is coded and prepared, it's time to start data analysis and interpretation. Data analysis is the process of looking for patterns in the data. Interpretation is when researchers try to figure out why they got the results and what they mean in the context of the real world. As you may recall from Module 4, there are different types of data analysis methods depending on the type of data you use. Here's a brief refresher of what these analysis methods look like, but you can revisit Module 4 and the additional resources for more information. For qualitative data, like interviews or focus groups, a group of people on the research team will review the data and work together to identify patterns in the data. For example, in a participatory research study, community members can be part of the team that reviews interview transcripts and identifies patterns or common things that people mentioned across interviews. The analysis of qualitative data is similar to data coding, but researchers don't count things up after putting them into the categories. In a quantitative study, the research team will use statistics to get the results, usually with the help of a trained statistician. Statistics means using mathematical formulas and numbers to analyze the data. They can also use computer programs and other software to help with the data analysis. For example, after behavioral coding and counting the frequency of behaviors when preparing the data, those numbers will be used in statistical formulas to answer questions. Community members can work with the statistician to figure out the best computer programs and statistical tests to use, or to decide how data should be used in the statistical test. This is a really complex topic, so check out the additional resources if you're interested in more information about analysis. With mixed methods, we'll use a combination of quantitative and qualitative methods. Community members may be able to provide important insight about how our qualitative and quantitative results fit together, as we discussed in the previous module. Interpreting our data refers to understanding what the results of the analysis actually mean. Researchers think about what the results tell them about their study and what they tell them about the real world. This helps us understand the implications our results may have on future research and clinical practice. It is the ultimate answer to our research question. Let's think back to the example from the last module, where we discussed an example study investigating the impact of a visual schedule program on autistic toddlers' distress when transitioning between activities. They found that emotional regulation didn't significantly decrease and that caregivers only used visual schedules during half of their child's transitions. But caregivers thought the visual schedule could be useful with more support learning how to use them. Interpreting these results tells us that the visual schedule program may not be effective yet, but in the future, it may be more effective if we give caregivers more support to use them. So we may want to adjust the timing and format of the therapy program to be more effective in the future. Significance means importance. It's important to understand the significance of the results at the end of the study. Community members play an important role in understanding the significance of our results. There are two types of significance: statistical significance and clinical significance. We'll review these in the next few slides. Statistical significance uses mathematical statistical tests to tell us how likely the results are due to chance or the therapy being tested. Clinical significance is if results are meaningful to community members and will make an impact on clinical outcomes or decisions. Clinically significant results can help families and clinicians make decisions about supports and services. When describing a therapy as effective, this is usually based on whether a quantitative experimental study found the therapy to result in statistically significant change. In other words, if statistical tests show that people who received therapy scored much higher than those who did not receive therapy, at a level that is likely not random or due to chance, it is considered statistically significant. But if a study's results aren't clinically significant or important to community members, then this means the study isn't very meaningful. Therefore, researchers must also make sure their research is clinically significant. Community involvement is essential to understand how significant results are. Community members can also tell researchers why they may have gotten their results. For example, an autistic adult might be able to use their own experiences to understand how an autistic child felt during different study procedures. It can help to reach out to new people who were not involved in the rest of the project. This way, they can bring a fresh perspective to interpreting the data. It is also important to include perspectives that may not have been represented on your research team. For example, if your research team had a lot of autistic men, you might want to reach out to autistic women and non-binary people to learn their thoughts about your data. Working with several different community members can also help you understand what the results mean for different autistic people and caregivers. After analyzing and interpreting the data, the final stage of the study is sharing the results. Dissemination is the research term for sharing the results of a study. Researchers need to make a plan for sharing their results in the study protocol. Traditionally, research has been shared by publishing articles in academic journals, but research articles can be difficult to read and can also be very expensive if you do not have special access. Research is sometimes also shared at conferences, but usually the audience is other researchers or clinicians. This means that it can be hard for caregivers and autistic people to learn about research results, even though they are the most impacted. Researchers need to come up with new ways to communicate research results to autistic people and caregivers. Knowing about important research results can help people make choices about their therapy and healthcare. Some researchers write layperson summaries for their journal articles. These summaries describe the research study in terms that are more familiar to non-research audiences. Plain language or easy-read summaries may also make these journals more accessible. Researchers can also write articles in popular press publications and discuss their findings on social media. Research findings can also be shared in additional formats, like pre-recorded videos or infographics to be posted online or shared on social media, and they can host virtual discussions with interested community members. When sharing results, it's important that researchers are specific about the therapy, support, or service they researched and how they measured the outcomes. This will help the audience understand what was involved in the study and can help caregivers make decisions for their child's care. Research teams can share their results with community organizations. For example, contacting local autism advocacy groups might help autistic people learn about their results. It can also be helpful to work with organizations focused on health and education. Many communities are not given resources to learn about autism results. It is important for researchers to think about how they can share results with people who are often left out. For example, they could provide translated results to cultural centers in their community. They could also provide a summary of their research to groups for single parents. There are many different ways to include marginalized people in the plan to share research results. Researchers should also get feedback from the community about the results. This way, community members can help researchers decide what to study next. Thank you for watching our training. We hope that these modules have been a helpful introduction to the research process. See our additional resources for more information about these topics and for information about how you can get involved in research. This resource is part of a project funded through a Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute Eugene Washington PCORI Engagement Award. The content is solely the responsibility of the authors and does not necessarily represent the official views of PCORI.